Hello, this is the third in the series of videos that I have been doing for the Public Law Revision. This video will be looking at the Human Rights Act, the chapter on the Human Rights Act. Okay, so when it comes to the Human Rights Act, I believe that there are essentially two types of questions that the examiner has been consistently asking prior to this. Once again, just like I've said in all the past videos as well, there obviously is no guarantee as to what the examiner is going to ask, right? There really is no way in which anyone can predict what's going to come out. Please remember that. What we do is sort of an educated guess, right? It really is. We base it on events that have happened in the UK. We base it on past year questions. We base it on the subject guide, the emphasis, things like that. So on that basis, for the chapter of Human Rights Act, I believe that there are two main types of questions that can come out. They are effectively pretty much the same, but the focus is different. One is the more common, the one that we're going to look at first, which is a general question about the Human Rights Act, asking about the effectiveness of the Human Rights Act. Now, this can be asked in a variety of ways, sometimes in ways that are so different that you might think it's a totally different question. But the answer is effectively the same. So sometimes they may just ask you, just like the 2019 question, right? So if you look at 2019 Zone A question 7, that's the one we're going to look at. That's the one you should have a handout for. No, actually, for Human Rights Act, I have a general handout for most of the Human Rights Act questions that you can be asked, right? A generic handout, please, we'll be referring to that. But if you look at 2019 Zone A question 7, discuss the extent to which the Human Rights Act provides a constitutional guarantee of individual rights and freedoms. Now, this is the type of question that I think most commonly comes up. They are asking you for an evaluation of the HRA. Now, please remember, it's always an evaluation of the HRA and not the ECHR, right? It's the HRA and not the ECHR. So please don't go launch into an answer about the articles of the ECHR, right? Article 2 and Article 3 and Article 6 and so on and so forth, right? That's not what they're asking, right? Usually the question will be on the Human Rights Act itself. So which means you talk about the sections, right? Sections 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 19, just like what we learned. So this particular question, just like most of the generic questions, will be asking you about, or will be requiring you to talk about your opinion, your evaluation of the Human Rights Act. Is the Human Rights Act, does it really provide a constitutional guarantee of individual rights and freedoms? So what is your opinion? Does the Human Rights Act provide this constitutional guarantee of individual rights and freedoms, right? So how I would go about answering this would be a section by section evaluation of the HRA. And then after that, I will conclude as to whether or not really is the HRA good. So in the context of this particular question, they want to know whether it is a constitutional guarantee of individual rights and freedoms. But let's say, for example, if you were to look at the 2018 October paper, question 6. I don't know if you have the October paper. 2018 October paper, question 6. Discuss the case for and against repealing the Human Rights Act and replacing it with the British Bill of Rights. Now, whenever there is a British Bill of Rights question, everybody gets all worked up a little bit. But in my opinion, it's effectively the same answer. Now, why would you repeal the Human Rights Act? You would repeal the Human Rights Act and replace it with the British Bill of Rights if the Human Rights Act is not working, or if there are flaws with the Human Rights Act, it's not doing its job. So once again, this question as well is an evaluation of the Human Rights Act. and evaluate it, right? Look at the good things with the Human Rights Act, what are the problems with the Human Rights Act, and then, ladies and gentlemen, you can conclude as to whether or not the Human Rights Act needs to be repealed and replaced with something else. Now here they've just put in the British Bill of Rights. Right now there is no clear definition as to what is the British Bill of Rights. There isn't an actual bill somewhere that we can refer to and make a reference, right? So most of the questions are usually in that context, right? Meaning that just asking you about an evaluation of the Human Rights Act. So let's look at some earlier questions, even earlier than that. By the way, there is a Human Rights Act question every year, right? So so if you look at 2017, right? If you look at 2017 question, 2017 October, if you look at it, 2017 October question 4. In what respects, if any, could a British Bill of Rights and Responsibilities provide a better method of protection for fundamental rights than the Human Rights Act 1998? So this is effectively asking you to compare the Human Rights Act with this fictional, at this moment, right, British Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. So it's still an evaluation of the Human Rights Act. Perhaps you could compare it with some general characteristics of Bill of Rights in other countries. Most popular would probably be the US, but effectively it's still an evaluation of the HRA. So this is the point I'm trying to get across. Generally, if the question is asking you, regardless of the words they use, effectively what they're asking you is the HRA working? Right? Tell me if the HRA is good. Do I need to replace the HRA with something else? Yes or no? What is your opinion? Right? An evaluation of the HRA as a whole. Okay, that's the first type of question. The second type of question is a little bit more focused on Section 3 and Section 4 only. Right? So in order for you to be able to answer that, you need to have a very clear sort of understanding and grasp of the cases of Section 3 and Section 4, and then come up with a evaluation of is Section 3 and Section 4 working. So an example of this would be, let's take a look at 2019 Zone B. 2019 Zone B, question 7. Discuss the extent to which the Human Rights Act 1998 strikes the right balance between the courts and Parliament. Now, the words Section 3 and Section 4 were not used, but just by reading the question, it is obvious to me that what they want here is an evaluation of Section 3 and Section 4. The Section 3 and Section 4 obviously provide a lot of power to the courts today, right? But has this power been at the expense of Parliament? That's the question. That's the issue here, right? Have the courts been given too much power, or is it the case that the courts have not been given enough power and Parliament still can do whatever Parliament wants? That's this whole Section 3, Section 4 debate, right? So there are some very important cases. Okay, my apologies. Something went wrong with my light. I'm just going to continue with the video because for me to start all over again is going to be very tedious, right? Okay, so evaluation of Section 3 and Section 4 type questions will require you to go through maybe 3 or 4 cases, including one very recent case, a 2018 case, which sort of get into how the courts and Parliament have managed to balance this power between them, right? Another example of this type of question, so I just read to you the 2019 Zone B question 7, correct? So if you take a look at 2018 Zone B question 7, right? For me, it's the same type of question. Discuss how the courts have developed Section 3 and Section 4 of the HRA 1998. discuss how the courts have developed Section 3 and Section 4 of the HRA 1998. Then also you've got, let's say for example, 2008 Zone A. What are we looking at in 2008 Zone A? Oh, same question. Discuss how the courts have developed Section 3 and Section 4 of the HRA 1998. So, ladies and gentlemen, so my conclusion is this, right? There are two types of HRA questions. Number one, a HRA question that is asking you to evaluate the HRA as a whole. And number two, a question that is specific on Section 3 and Section 4, and this requires you to get into case law in some detail, right? Getting into the opinions of the judges and things like that. That would be necessary to do well in a Section 3 and Section 4 type question. If I were you, I would definitely prepare for both types of these essay questions, because the HRA question is a every year question, and in my opinion, a fairly easy, well, it's a bit presumptuous of me to say that, fairly predictable, maybe that's a better word, right? A fairly predictable type of question that can come up, right? A good area to prepare. Right. So now the first thing we're going to look at is that generic type of question. So I specifically want to look at the 2019 Zone A question, question 7, right? Discuss the extent to which the HRA 1998 provides a constitutional guarantee of individual rights and freedoms. Now, I would like you to make reference to the generic HRA document or file that I would have sent to you. It is it is not an answer to a specific question, but it's a generic answer for any one of those evaluate the entire HRA type questions, right? So again, it is a bit long. It's about 4 pages, right, roughly. But if you were to write out, perhaps you may find it a struggle to write out everything that is written here. So you need to be able to know how much you can write and how much you cannot, and so perhaps you can remove some of what I've written or add on if according to your requirements or according to your how fast you can write and things like that, right? So generally I would start off with an introduction saying what the Human Rights Act is all about. I usually talk about the fact that it was Tony Blair's part of his reform package. Excuse me. Right, so and talking about when it came about, why it came about, a little bit like that, right? I generally will go into also why the need for the HRA. I give a few cases, especially to show that human rights in the UK was not at its best protected, right? There really was a lot of problems with protection of rights in the UK prior to the HRA, and citizens who wanted further protection, they wanted to employ their rights under the European Convention of Human Rights, had to take the case up all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. And this was something that was extremely expensive. Obviously, it was something that was time consuming, and not everybody could take the fight all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights. It was too expensive, too time consuming, and very complex. That is effectively what I've written there under the heading of why the need for the HRA. Now, depending on the question, perhaps this part of my answer is not necessary, right? The why the need for the HRA, if you feel that you need to cut down a little bit on this answer and you're not able to write so much, this is perhaps where you either reduce or you remove entirely, up to you, right? Because if the question just says, let's talk about the HRA, then maybe you just get into the HRA straight away. maybe you could incorporate a much shorter version of these 3 or 4 paragraphs by saying why there was a need for the HRA quickly, in just 2 sentences, then you're done. So once again, a lot of this depends on what the question is asking and your ability to write as well, right? So don't make judgments based on that, right? So going straight into the evaluation of the HRA, right? So so if they ask you, is it a fundamental guarantee of rights? So let's evaluate it, right? Do we need to replace it with the British Bill of Rights? Let's evaluate the HRA. Has the HRA done what it promised to do? We have to evaluate the HRA. So regardless of what the question is asking, I'm confident that it's going to be an evaluation of the HRA that is needed. Obviously, you will use the points that I'm giving here, but you will need to suit your answer to suit the question. You will need to cater the answer for the question. So if the question says, is it a fundamental guarantee of rights? Then make sure throughout your answer you say yes or no, it's a fundamental guarantee of rights. Don't just put down the points as I have put here. You see what I mean? Okay, so going through this effectively, let's start off with section 3. Right? Again, whenever it comes to essay questions, I am really reluctant to just read out the answer to you because I feel that that's just such a waste of time, and you can read it yourself, right? So we'll just be discussing the issues as we go along, right? So section 3 effectively, and you will see this throughout this answer, I take each of these important sections, or what I think are important sections, and then what I do is I say why the section is good, or say why the section does in fact protect rights, or does in fact go to point towards it being a fundamental guarantee of rights or whatever, right? But then after that, I will look at what are the problems with the section. So the good things first, then the bad things. That's how I have done this evaluation. Then at the end of the day, I will conclude accordingly. So that's how I start off with section 3. So section 3 is good because firstly, what section 3 does is that it says, as far as it is possible to do so, all primary and subordinate legislation must be read and interpreted in a manner that is compatible with the convention rights. Correct, right? So this is a good thing, isn't it? Right? Effectively, this says that today, Parliament, the courts are able to, if you will, change the meaning of the words that were clearly laid down by Parliament, or interpret it, even though it goes against the direct, clear wordings of Parliament. But they can choose to take an interpretation that will best make that statute in compliance with the convention rights. This is the power of section 3. So like I put down there, the courts have never had this kind of powers before, right? And this is a huge thing. And we see this in many cases. The most famous of which is the Gaiden against Godin Mendoza, right? This is a very good case. This is a very important case as well, especially later when we're looking at those section 3 and section 4 type questions, right? You need to get into a detailed evaluation of Gaiden against Godin Mendoza. So this is a case where the main issue here was can a lease that was owned by a person, can it pass on to his same-sex partner, right? Can it pass on to a same-sex partner? The law as it stood clearly said spouse, but a few years prior to this case, spouse had been extended to include a cohabitee, of course a heterosexual cohabitee, right? So the issue here is, can the word spouse be expanded also to include a same-sex cohabitee, a same-sex partner? That was the issue here. Despite the obvious and clear wording of the statute which says spouse. The courts held that it could, right? The courts held that it could, despite the clear wording of the statute. The courts felt that the powers given to them by Section 3 allowed the courts to take an interpretation that was not the dictionary definition of the words used in the statute, but an interpretation that would be making it compliant with the European Convention of Human Rights. This was also seen in the case of R against A, right? Complainant sexual history. We've discussed this case throughout the academic year. But very quickly, please read this case, right? It's a good case. But very quickly, this was a situation where the issue here was the rights of the accused person, right? So here the section 43 of the YJCEA, which says that a victim's past sexual history in a rape case, so the victim's past sexual history will not be a relevant consideration in the trial, right? This was designed to help the victims of rape. This was designed to help and encourage victims of rape to come forward and go through with the entire process of the prosecution without having to worry that their past sexual history will be dragged up and they will be embarrassed and things like that, right? So the courts held that the victim's past sexual history is not relevant. But the issue here then was, what if the victim's past sexual history is something that is important for my defense, me being the accused person, right? So a blanket ban like that may not be so good. So the courts here held that yes, although the wording was very clear, the wording of the statute was that it is not relevant, cannot be brought in, the courts interpreted it to mean that it cannot be brought in unless the courts feel that it is relevant, unless the courts feel that it is useful. So here we see two cases, right, that are clearly telling us that, or clearly exemplifying Section 3. The courts today have the power to sort of move away from even the clear and unambiguous statutes in order to make that statute compliant with the European Convention of the Human Rights. But you need to remember, so this is good, right? Say this is good. This helps with the protection of rights. And in both these situations, it really helped with the protection of rights. But Section 3 is not a free-for-all, right? Section 3 is not a free-for-all. Section 3 is not a situation where now the judge can pretty much do whatever he wants, right? Section 3 is not a case where today the judge can ignore the intention of Parliament, right? No matter how justified it may seem to be, the intention of Parliament cannot be ignored. You can talk about the case of, I'm just taking a look at the textbook here, a very good case, Crown against Wilkinson, right? Crown brackets Wilkinson versus the IRC, right? So I repeat that, Crown brackets Wilkinson versus the IRC. This is 2005, right? The UK House of Lords. This case said that regardless of the fact that it was obvious discrimination on the facts, the issue here was when a man dies, a woman can continue some tax benefits. But when a woman dies, the husband, can't continue getting those benefits. So this was challenged to say that this was unfair and discriminatory. And the courts held that yes, unfair, discriminatory, very much true. But the courts held that the entire statute was absolutely and unambiguously clear that they only intended it for the wife to benefit and not the other way around. So the point we're making here is that although you have some examples of cases where the courts have been happy to move away, but the courts have also made it clear that the intention of Parliament is not something to be played around with. It is not to say today that the Parliament's words are no longer relevant and the judge can do whatever the judge wants, right? Further, in the answer that I've given you, if you go back to the answer, there are clear limitations on what the judge can do under Section 3 as well. If you look at Section 3 sub 2b and 3 sub 2c, these two sections expressly state that, number one, any application of Section 3 does not affect the validity and continuing operation of any offending legislation. This means that even though a judge has interpreted a particular piece of legislation in a way that to make it compatible, that original piece of legislation is still there. It's not been changed. It's not been amended. It's still there. And it continues to have effect the way in which perhaps Parliament intended it. Because there's nothing to say that another judge on another day may not choose to give that piece of legislation its strict dictionary meaning. So this is a problem. Right? Section 3 seems to have given powers to the judiciary quite a bit. But number one, as we saw in Wilkinson, it doesn't mean that the courts now can ignore Parliament. Number two, Section 3 sub 2b and 3 sub 2c clearly say that the courts cannot do anything to the act of Parliament, right? Parliament is still supreme, that act of Parliament still prevails. And if you take a look at the answer that I've given you as well, if you go down a little bit, in the case, an example that I've given you is Re W&B, Children Care Plan 2002. And in this particular case, in Re W&B, it was clear that the higher court had reprimanded the lower court for trying to go too far with Section 3. They said that there must be a line drawn between interpretation, legitimate interpretation, and redrafting of the statute. If you change the meaning of the statute too much, so I apologize, my dog is acting up, right? If you change the meaning of the statute too much, this is unacceptable and this will not be allowed, right? So this is these are the problems with Section 3, right? These are the problems with Section 3, and this is perhaps why you cannot say that the Human Rights Act is a guarantee of the citizens' rights today. Because a guarantee would mean as soon as the courts discover that there is an act of Parliament that takes away your rights, the courts can declare that that act is illegal or that act is unconstitutional, like they can do in the US, like they can do in any other country with a written constitution. But in the UK, things are different, ladies and gentlemen. And although Section 3 does provide the courts with a tremendous amount of power that they never did have before, but perhaps to say that it is a guarantee of rights might be going too far, might be going too much, because that's how Section 3 has been structured. And I think the reason why it's been structured this way is so that to preserve parliamentary supremacy. And in order to preserve parliamentary supremacy, it is my opinion that perhaps the effectiveness of the protection of rights has been compromised. So that's Section 3. Let's move on to Section 4. So as you can see, even in this answer as well, I do spend a lot of time on Section 3 and Section 4. So when it comes to your just Section 3 and Section 4 answers, all you need to do is perhaps just expand on what I've written here, right? Put in some of the cases that your textbook suggests, And that's pretty much the answer as well. So what does Section 4 talk about, right? Section 4 talks about a declaration of incompatibility. So again, this is also a power that the judiciary never had before, right? A power that the judiciary never had before. And what is effectively this power is that if the courts have decided that they cannot use Section 3 or they cannot employ Section 3 to interpret the law to make it better, then what they can do is they can make a declaration of incompatibility. This declaration of incompatibility is a good thing in the sense that it kind of highlights to Parliament or highlights to the government that look, this is wrong and you should do something about it. That's the value of Section 4, right? That's the value of Section 3 and Section 4 put together, in fact, right? So let's look at some examples of Section 4 working. If you take a look at A versus the Secretary of State for the Home Department, this is one of the cases that is in the handout that I've given you. This was with regard to Section 23 of the Anti-Terrorism, Crime and Security Act 2001. Anti-Terrorism, Crime and Security Act 2001. This act was very, very abusive. It removed judicial review of arrests. It allowed for detention without trial. It allowed for all kinds of bad things. Obviously, this was in direct reaction to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the US. However, this was challenged under the Human Rights Act, and as a result of these challenges, the courts held that the Section 23 of the Anti-Terrorism, Crime and Security Act was incompatible. And because of that, the courts then went on to amend the law, and the Section 23 was amended and it was made a little bit better. I say a little bit, but yeah, it was made a little bit better. And arguably this came about because of the declaration of incompatibility. Without the declaration of incompatibility, this wouldn't have happened. There are many other cases that also show the power of a declaration of incompatibility. You've got Bellinger against Bellinger, right? Remember the case of the transgender person who wanted to get married. The issue was in his documentation, he was still a man, when in fact physically he was already a woman. A declaration was made there against the Matrimonial Causes Act. A declaration of incompatibility was made, and because of that declaration of incompatibility, Parliament made amendments, right? The Gender Recognition Act was brought about, and then very quickly after that, the Civil Partnership Act was introduced. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the power of Section 4, a declaration of incompatibility. Statistics show that every single time a DOI has been made, meaning it's not been overturned, it's not been appealed and things like that. So every time a final DOI has been made, the government has done something. Most of the time reform has been taken place, but at the very least the government issues a statement saying that we are looking into it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of a DOI. The government and Parliament will not ignore it so far, right? They will not ignore it. They will do something, even if they feel that they really don't want to do anything. They will do something, right? An example of them really not wanting to do anything is the Hearst case, right? HIRST. But they still are at least looking into what they can do. Okay, so that's the how Section 4 is a good thing, right? How Section 4 is enabling the rights of the citizens to be better protected. But ladies and gentlemen, if you look at Section 4 in itself, right? If you look at Section 4 sub 6 of the HRA, right? 4 sub 6 of the HRA clearly says that a declaration of incompatibility does not affect the continuing operation, validity, or effectiveness of any offending legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, that effectively means that even if the court has declared an act of parliament incompatible, that act of parliament continues to be valid. Right? Not only does it continue to be valid, it also may okay, I'm going to end this video here. I will continue this video very shortly in another one.